Alright guys, welcome back. JT here for DelicateBeats.com. Today I want to show you how to mix and master like the pros in Logic Pro X. Even though you're a beginner, today I'm going to show you simple tricks to get going and especially to learn by yourself, because it's so important to develop your own techniques, your originality, and ultimately your own sound. So stay tuned and we're going to learn to mix EDM, pop and rock, and trap in Logic Pro X. Lesson 1 is about mixing pop rock. I've got a little arrangement here with a bunch of different sounds: bass, guitar, pop, piano, strings, and vocals. So the first thing you want to do when you approach a mix is always to listen to the music first and really try to pinpoint which are the most important elements of the arrangement. So right off the bat, I can tell that these vocals are more background vocals, so they're not really important. I really want to put focus on the guitar. Right now, I haven't done any balance, so the guitar you probably couldn't hear, but here it is soloed. So this is going to be the most important element in my mix, and I'm going to work everything else around it. Now that we've pinpointed the most important instrument in our arrangement, what we're going to do is work on the balance, so volume levels and panning. But before really diving into the balance of the whole mix, you want to highlight the backbone. Usually the backbone is going to be the bass and the drums and your most important instrument. So what we're going to do first is reorganize these tracks in a hierarchy, an order of importance. I have my drums first, obviously, and the bass and the guitar. So what I'm going to do next is mute all of the elements. Actually, I'm even going to mute the bass and the guitar. I'm going to unmute these guys gradually to find a proper volume ratio between these elements. As you've probably heard in the past, it's very important to work at low levels. Why? Because this is probably going to take us a few minutes. In the case of a song, it might even take hours. So you really don't want to kill your ears in the first few minutes, or hours for that matter. A good trick, and I'm going to do this on the output for now. Usually I'll do that on my stereo system, but basically turn the volume way down to see if you still hear your guitar, your drums. Maybe I hear a bit too much of the guitar right now, so I'm going to pull that down a bit. I want to give this mix a rounder sound, so instead of going full blast on the drums, instead I'm going to pull the bass a little bit above the drums. Alright, now we can put that back to 0 dB. And what we can do now is go to our mixer by pressing this little button here. By the way, if you don't have these buttons, I doubt that, but you can always right-click on the taskbar at the top, and by clicking Customize Control Bar and Display, you can customize this bar so you have only the buttons that you want to see there. For example, I don't really use this guy here. I don't even know what it is. The library. Yeah, it's for the GarageBand sounds. If you don't want that to appear, you can go here and just unclick library, for example. We'll leave it here for now. We might need it, I don't know. Back to our arrangement. Now I've selected, just by clicking on one of the channels and dragging, our most important elements of the backbone. And what you want to do here is always keep the levels around -6 dBs, -5, as this is going to be our headroom for the mastering. So you can move all of the 3 faders at the same time when they're selected like this. So I'm going to pull them way down and just move all the way up to -6. So that should work for now. What we're going to do next, and this is really the most important part of the tutorial, is we're going to start playing with channel strips. What are channel strips? They are presets of effects that you can apply automatically to a channel by clicking on the settings button here. So if, for example, I want to mix my drums, I can go here, click from the legacy menu here. I have a bunch of presets for channel mixing. If you don't see this menu appear, I suggest that you quickly go to Logic Pro X in the menu bar here at the top and download the additional content. I believe the additional content you're going to want to look for is legacy and compatibility right here. All right. So once that is downloaded, let's go back to the drums, and no, actually I'm not going to solo it. I'm going to try to mix it while listening to the rest of the instruments. So you go to Legacy, Logic, and here in drums and percussion, we are going to mix acoustic drums. It's an acoustic kit because it has all of the elements, the bass drum, the snare, and the hats. And we're just going to pick one at random, acoustic kit number 1. So here you see that this channel strip contains a compressor, an EQ, a delay that is muted for now, and a reverb. What you want to do when you load up a channel strip is to listen to what it does to the sound. So what I can tell you right now is that it's compressing too much. I like the reverb on it, and we're going to have to work with the EQ since there is nothing here. So first of all, let's work with the compressor. Compression can be a highly debated and fairly controversial subject in the mixing world. So today I want to keep it very, very simple for you guys. All we want to focus on today are the main controls of a compressor, which is the threshold, the ratio, and the makeup gain. So as you can see here, the new Logic mixer has the compressor VU integrated into the channel strip. Whenever you look at this little thing here, if it goes, past, 50%, the middle here, you know that you're over compressing. It might be something you want to go for. In this case, pop rock is such a natural sounding and, organic sounding style. You don't want to over compress. It's going to sound fake and people are going to, notice it right away. How do you not over compress? You pull the threshold down. So let's go to 0. And what we want to do today is focus on this VU here and not go over -5 dBs, okay? Now that it's at 0, let's play the track. And move it so the little bar here goes around 5 dBs on most of the drum hits, but doesn't really go overboard. This way we compress the sound and we keep a natural sound. We're not going to touch the ratio as we trust the channel strip creator. And now we're going to focus on the third dial here, the makeup gain. Usually when you compress, it lowers the sound. So in this case, they've added 2 dBs. But when I listen to my backbone, I feel like the drums are still too present. So I'm going to use this to lower the drum sound again. So, 0 for me for now, it's good. Let's move on to EQ. In this channel strip, there's nothing done to the drums. So what we're gonna do is a few simple things just to highlight the hits that we like. In this case, I wanna go for a very round mix, so I might work on the kick and maybe tame the snare a little bit more. Whenever you're EQing with the channel EQ in Logic, you wanna press the analyzer to know what's going on. So let's play again the track. So you can already tell that the snare has this high bump at 200 Hertz, and there's a lot of low frequencies because of the kick drum. So we're going to want to tame that a little bit. Usually when I want to take out all of the unnecessary low end, as this is going to become a problem when we master, I usually use the low cut EQ, and by dragging all the way up this number here, I make the curve very steep. That way, everything that falls here, see this? All of that bass that you actually can't hear, but the audio summation engine here will hear and will work with on the compression. It can become like an inaudible problem. So we want to always cut pretty much everything below 43 Hertz. Now we're gonna tame this bump here just a little bit. Any of these points you can drag, okay, like this. In this case, when I say tame, I mean take out some of the frequencies. So I'm lowering it, and usually what I do is look at the analyzer and match the width of the bell according to the frequency analyzer. You can always hear the effect of an EQ bell that you've applied by clicking the according color here at the top. So let's make a test. And I know that the top of the snare usually sits between 500 and 5K, something here. So usually what I'll do is bring down a big bell like this. And this is also where the vocal is going to be. So it's always useful to take out some of the snares using EQ right around where the vocal is going to sit. So that's pretty good for drums. Finally, I said that I liked the reverb that they had. It's a small room, percussion room, 1.5 seconds of length. So it's a small reverb. What we're going to do here is just play with the amount of reverb send that we have. We're not going to play with the dry, as we want to keep all of the attack of the dry signal, and just add in or take out some of that. Again, with reverb, you don't want necessarily to hear too much of the reverb. You just want to use it so that the drum track gels with the rest of the instruments. So you don't want to exaggerate, because if you exaggerate the drums, then it's going to take all of the room in the mix, and it becomes very difficult for the rest of the instruments to fit, or at least to have their own little space in the mix. I'm gonna go back to the EQ and try to make our kick even rounder, because right now it's a bit stiff. I've used this low mid bell for the snare, so what I'm gonna do is take this one instead, move it all the way to around 60 Hertz, make just a little bell, much narrower than that, and let's work with 2-3 dBs for now. A technique called musical EQing. Musical EQing is not paying attention too much to the mathematical value here. You know, some mixing blogs, they're going to tell you like snares are, the smack of the snare is around 2K, 5K, these kinds of things. But musical EQing is more around, you know, musical notes. And whenever you pull a frequency like that really, really high, in this case 24 dBs, you start to hear musical notes. If you've watched my snares, my EDM snare tutorial, for example, you get a sense of that when we pull that huge bell around 180, 200. So I advise you, if you want to have more mixing techniques for drums, pay a visit to that page. But for now, we want to highlight the kick, and the kick is going to bring also the root note of the kick, and it has to match the bass track. So around 90 and around 50, both are quite interesting. I'm gonna go for 50, or actually 48, because it sounds deeper, and that's the kind of sound I want to bring out in the track. And whenever you do these drastic EQs, you can always go back to the compressor and compress a bit harder. Alright, so we're now all the way up to -7. To my ears, it's not sounding overly compressed, so I'm gonna stay with that. Maybe ease off a bit. Let's say 6, 7. Yeah. Alright, now on to the bass. We're gonna do the same thing. Settings, legacy, logic. We're gonna go for bass guitar, and we're looking for a very muffled, very soft sound. So let's try dubwise. Okay, I'm gonna put the volume down a bit, because sometimes these channel strips will, you know, take the volume up a few dBs. So what do we have here? We have a bass amp. Which makes the sound a bit deeper. I like it. But what I'm going to do, these mid frequencies and treble, I don't really like. It's just distortion, and I don't find it too useful for my mix. So and also the mid here bring a bit of mud, so I'm going to put that down. Okay. Next up is the channel EQ, and here you can see that the EQ is very similar to what we have on our drums, and that takes me to a very interesting topic, which is frequency separation. The art of frequency separation is to visualize your mix in bands of frequencies. Usually the kick is the lowest element in the mix. It could be the bass, but I find it usually easier to have our kick sit at the very end here on the left. Have the bass, you know, start around 80 to 200. This is where most of the frequency content of the bass is going to reside. And then in the case of our backbone here, usually the guitar is going to go here. So we want to really, you know, try to have these elements really have their own little space. So what we're going to do in this case, we're going to compare the drums and the bass. So by turning on the analyzers on both EQs, we're going to play the track. And the bass is really, you know, playing around, if you use this, from 60 to 150. So we're going to use the low cut to take the bass out of the kick sway, and let's try 60 here. And we're not going to use this bump here, as I think that it's already boosted around these frequencies. Whenever I use the term mud, it means that the low frequencies are getting blurred. In this case, I still feel like the bass makes the whole mix blurry. So what I'm going to do is pull this low cut, even higher, all the way up to 70, and I'm going to lower the volume also. Alright, so that's pretty good for now. Let's move on to the compression of the bass. And we're going to do the same trick. Oh, see, here they're using the vintage opto. It's still the same three dials that we're going to use, the knobs here. So the first thing I'm going to do is move the threshold all the way down to 0. And by looking at this, I'm going to try again to, compress 5 dBs on the bass. And actually, you know what? I don't need that makeup gain. In this digital world, we can always move the fader up, so it doesn't really matter. Right, and let's move the volume down a bit. Alright, so let's finish off our backbone with the guitar. What I want to do here with the guitar is make it a bit brighter. It's fairly muffled right now, and since it's our most important instrument, we want to make it shine, literally and figuratively speaking. Let's try one of our channel strips here. So it's an electric guitar. We have guitar tone samplers. These are presets of amps. Complete rigs is with effects and all that. In this case, it's a pop rock. So let's try one of those rock here presets. Why not, clean stereo chorus? I usually don't really like chorus on anything. I think it makes everything sound 80s-ish and a bit tacky too. What we want to do is just give it more body and a bit of sparkle at the top. So here you have a bunch of things: pedal board, amp, EQ, exciter, and compressor. So we're going to turn everything off. Start with the pedal board. See what we have in there. So there's a bunch of different things. There's a compressor, there's distortion, retro chorus, flanger, blue echo. Again, we're going to turn everything off. It's off when the red light is on. So right now everything is off. Or actually it's the opposite. Everything is on right now, so let's turn everything off. Let's start with the compressor and say the distortion to see what it sounds like. So really this is what I didn't like, the distortion, so I'm going to take that out. And I really actually like what it does here. Brings out the mids and a bit of the high mids too. So I'm gonna keep a fairly high level on the compressor here and lower the volume. I want to keep a fairly natural tone on the guitar, so I'm not going to use any of this. You can always play around with it, see if it creates an effect that you like. Well, see, I'm mistaken, because here the retro chorus actually makes the signal stereo, which I like. So what I'm going to do is sync it to the tempo and see it change the rate here. and I'm going to move the depth down a bit so that we don't hear too much of the effect. So we already hear that just using the pedal board brings out the guitar a bit more in the mix, especially at low volumes. It's always the best test to make sure that there's more space created for the track you're working on. So I'm just going to use the chorus. I don't want to, use too much effects on the track. Now this is a cab with the cabinet. Cab head and cabinet, or actually amp head and cabinet. Sorry for purists out there, I'm getting lost in the terminology. So the cabinet is giving a bit of room to the sound. I find it interesting, but I find it a bit too much. So what I'm going to do is actually, if I can, move the microphone closer to the cabinet. And I'm going to look at what's going on here. So there's EQ, which I could just, move all the way to the center so it doesn't affect too much of the color of the tone, the guitar tone. I don't want reverb for now, so I'm going to turn it off, and the effects are off too, so this is good. Now what we are looking for is presence. We want to highlight the higher mids and the high frequencies of the guitar track. So it's always a very intuitive process with any of these knobs. What you want to do is find a value where you feel the guitar or any of the tracks you're working on sit well and sound natural. Okay, so usually I just listen, use my ears, and move these knobs around. Here at the very top, I feel like it makes the guitar a bit harsh. I want to keep my mix very smooth, so around 75% of the knob's full value is interesting. And let's move on to the EQ. Again, as we talked about frequency separation, we want to move the guitar out of the way of the drums and bass. So what I'm going to do is have a fairly steep, but not as steep as what we had on the drum. And we are going to, whenever you can't find the little dot like this, like I'm moving my mouse around and I can't find my low cut, you can always just click on the value here, the hertz, and move it up or down. So we are going to move this roughly around, 110 hertz. So it's out of the bass's range, out of the drums obviously, but we're still going to keep some of the body of the guitar, which sits around 200. So let's listen to that. And I don't necessarily like what we're doing here on the high mids, so I'm just gonna remove all of this EQ. It's a very deep and reverby tone that we have, and I like that. So what I did is move back the low cut to 80, and now we're gonna work on the sparkle and the high end of the guitar. So let's bring these guys back in. Okay, so we already have a bell here that we can use. As I said earlier, the vocals sit roughly between 500 and 5K, and mostly around 1K and 2K. Move the guitar out of the vocals way and make a medium bell around 5K. And we're gonna try to musical EQ this guitar by making the bump as high as it's possible. Let's move the volume down so we just don't crush our ears. And we're gonna move this bell here to find the value that complements actually our guitar tone best. usually when you find the perfect spot, it's going to sound very natural, even with very unnatural values such as plus 24 dB. So roughly around 3,700 hertz, I like it. So I'm going to move it down to, 4 dBs maybe. And we're going to lower the volume, make sure that there's not too much guitar. And I feel like it could have a little bit more body. So what I'm going to do is, instead of dipping around 160, is boost it by 2 dBs. Now it sounds a bit muddy, so let's bring back the low cut a bit. And if you want to be even more of a perfectionist, you can also, use a high cut here with a very, slow slope instead of fast slope, and just remove anything that doesn't really exist in our track. If we look, it already stops, around 5. Okay, so this is it for the backbone. Now that we have a strong backbone, we're going to mix the other instruments around that backbone. Let's attack the piano tracks first. I have these 2 tracks, and they're still in MIDI. Let's listen to what we have. Now the channel strips only work on WAV files. So what I'm going to do here is select the track and bounce it into place. Sorry, I went a bit fast here. When you right click on a track, usually because I've done that in the past, it's in the quick links, but if you go down here to bounce and join, bounce in place, this is going to export just our piano chords to a WAV file. So we now have this identical sounding piano track. I'm going to remove the tail here. And we are now able to add a channel strip on this WAV file. Now, Logic doesn't have any keyboard or piano channel strips. So what we're going to do is use the knowledge that we've acquired mixing the backbone to mix our new piano track. So I know that I'm going to need the 2 most basic plugins, the channel EQ and a compressor. Okay, and I'm going to mute the compressor and just solo this piano track. And what I want to do is achieve an 80s-ish pop rock piano sound. And if you're familiar with, the keyboardists of the 80s and 90s, they use these fairly basic piano sounds, piano patches that came with their synths. So it makes up for piano patches that didn't have a whole lot of dynamics, that didn't have 12 velocities per key and stuff like that. So, and also usually to have the sound that cut through, 2 guitar sounds plus the bass plus the drums, usually what they did was make the piano really, really crisp. So that's what we're going to try to do. We're going to cut the low frequencies, all the way up to, I'd say 140 to start with. And knowing that the body of the guitar, our main instruments, is around 200, I'm going to dip at 200. And finally, we already have a bump around 4K for the guitar, so I'm going to go higher, and I'm just going to do this really high shelf. Let's listen to the piano now. So we started with a very warm tone, and now it's kind of icy almost, very cold, very rigid piano sound. And we're even going to emphasize that characteristic more with the compressor. If we go here in the compressor presets, there is this Type U aggressive piano preset. And what that's going to do is really squash the sound and really reduce the dynamics to the most. So, and I'm even going to, pull that threshold even higher. So let's listen to that. You see what it does to the transients. The attack comes very, very aggressive. So that's what we're looking for here. And now we can even, exaggerate even more that high shelf. Now we're going to try to balance this with the rest of the arrangement. I'm not going to put the drums in yet. And obviously we don't want to overpower the guitar here with the piano, so it's just going to sit behind the guitar. And to help me with that, I'm going to use a reverb. I really like the Space Designer. And I'm going to use a medium space and a medium room, and why not try this piano reflection preset. And we're using the Space Designer to move back the piano behind the guitar in our virtual space. So let's turn it on and off to see the difference. And the more I move the send up, the more muddy the sound gets. So what I can do also is EQ the reverb. I'm going to click here on this little button and remove everything that's below, let's say, roughly 200 Hertz. So the reverb helped us to move the piano further away in the arrangement, but I still feel like our mix is muddy. So I'm going to play more with the low cut here on the main piano. I feel like maybe it's not so much the low cut as the particular reverb preset that we're using, so I'm gonna let the drums and the piano play while switching from presets to preset to find something I like. So that's not too bad. Now, knowing that I have a second piano track to mix and I want these two tracks to gel, what I'm going to do is save this new channel strip we custom created ourselves. So by clicking on settings, you can save channel strip as, and I'm going to name this 80s rock piano. All right. Now, knowing that the second piano overdub track is also a MIDI track, I'm going to bounce in place the piano overdub. And because we don't need these MIDI tracks anymore, I'm just going to delete them. All right. So again, let's remove the tail. And let's isolate our two piano tracks here. So now we're going to have to move the piano out of the way of the backbone, so the guitar, the bass, and the drums. So by using panning, I'm going to open the mixer and I'm going to pan the chords and the ostinato on each of the sides like this. Try to find a balance that I like. I'm going for a very wide, very spacey sound. I can go even further on each of the sides. And notice as I pan these guys left and right, I can lower the volume because they have their own space on the sides. Nothing is on the sides yet. And I think I'm even going to add some echo to add movement to the piano overdubs. So I'm gonna remember that I was around 28.5 dBs and 31 on the right, sorry. And I'm gonna try this echo plugin. And what I like usually to make this U2-ish echo sound, or delay sound, I'm going to use a 1/8 dotted echo. Obviously this is very intense, so what I'm going to do is, first of all, move the color down here so that I don't have too much of the higher frequencies on the delayed send, and move the wetness down here. All right, and then we're going to move back to plus 31, 28.5, oops, sorry, minus 28.5. And let's listen to our mix now. And because the sound is so low now, I can move the wet knob here back up. And that's it for the piano. The last two sounds that we have in the arrangement are orchestral strings and a glockenspiel. Because these instruments are more embellishments than important parts of the arrangement, I'm not going to mix those too much. I'm probably just going to use EQ and a little bit of volume and panning to place these sounds around the main instruments. So starting with the strings, let's listen to what we have when we just add the strings in without doing anything. So what I really like is more of the the violas and the violins, and not so much the basses and cellos. So using EQ, I'm going to remove some of the low frequencies on the basses and cellos. So let's open up the analyzer. And using just a simple low shelf like this, okay, and I'm gonna emphasize these violas and violins here with a big bell around 2K. And I'm even going to add a lot of air with this extreme high shelf here. And now, because I've emphasized the characteristics that I like, I can just move the volume down. And I'm moving the stereo signal to the left so that the cellos and the violas, complement each other on each side. And you can also always make sure that a stereo signal is balanced by looking at the two VUs here. So right now my sound is a bit more on the left, and that's not a bad thing because the piano overdubs here really take up a lot of space on the right. And actually what I could do is make the sound even wider. So I'm going to use in the imaging section the direction mixer. Sorry. Okay. And here on the spread you can just go, make it wider or even make it mono. that's pretty much it. I could finish it off with a compressor. Let's see what they have for strings. Nothing. So what we're going to do is use a compressor tool, and we're going to just, oh, platinum orchestral. Let's see what this sounds like. There's no compression, so we're going to move the threshold a bit higher. Now we're over compressing a bit, so let's move it down. I'm gonna try something different on the pianos. I feel like I may be putting too much energy on the right channel with the rock piano thing here. So I'm gonna move that back to the center. Move the strings to a more balanced, centered position. And really, I just want to hear and feel those little higher notes. Like, and I'm going to move the chords back to the center and lower the volume, see what it sounds like. Again, I'm using the same trick to make sure that the chords are evenly distributed in the left and right channels. All right, and finally, we're going to top it off with the highest element in terms of frequencies, the glockenspiel. Let's solo that for a second. So again, it's a stereo sound. We're going to keep it in the middle for now, see what it does. And let's add that to the overall arrangement. When I pan like this, I really just go by feeling. Usually I'll close my eyes and really try to find a spot where in this case the glockenspiel is untouched, so to say. So. And again, you really just want to hear these little magical sprinkles that the glockenspiel brings in. You don't really need to hear all of the, the melody that they play. And why not add a huge reverb on this one? Kind of a orchestral hall type of thing. So let's go here in the presets, large spaces, halls, and I don't know. Let's try this vintage gear hall. I'm going to move the send down a bit. And because this is a background sound, more of an embellishment, you can really go hardcore on the whole reverb thing. Okay, move that back to the center a bit. And the final part of this part one of the tutorial is vocals. So here I have this chopped up little thingy. And it's a dry vocal. So what we're going to do is go back here to our channel strip presets and go voice, and it's a male voice. And because this is not a lead, obviously there's no lyrics in the track, we're going to go for male. No, not ambient lead, but backing harmonics. Let's try that. So there's a bunch of plugins again. We're going to go over each individual plugin to figure out what they do on the plugin chain, starting with EQ. So as I said, the human voice is usually, you know, more represented around this area, 1K to 2K. In this case, they've cut the low frequencies all the way up to 150, and they're even making a dip at 200. Now, it always depends on the mic you're using and the booth or no booth, all this stuff. Again, let's just trust our ears and listen to the vocal now with the EQ.
Oh, 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 oh. Oh, 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 oh.
So that's pretty good. I hear some air that I'm maybe gonna want or not, and it's removing some of the muddiness. So let's move on to compression, just to make sure that it's not over compressing or anything like that.
Oh, 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 oh. Oh, 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 oh.
That's good. Now, modulation delay. Let's see what that does.
Oh, 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 oh. Oh, 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 oh.
Oh, that's actually just a doubler. So,
oh, 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 oh.
So it's kind of moving the left and right signals to each of the sides with a little delay. We don't really hear it, so I'm gonna leave it in for now. Chorus, as you know, I'm not a big fan of, especially on vocals. I think it sounds tacky.
Oh, 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 oh. Oh, 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 oh. Oh, oh, oh.
But with this really low value, I guess it helps to change the stereo image of the vocal, which is not bad. Ensemble is going to do a bit of the same thing.
Oh, 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 oh.
Now these three are, you know, not necessary. I think I'm going to leave them out for now. Just listen to the plug-in chain with the reverb in.
Oh, 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 oh. Oh, 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 oh.
Now that may be too much reverb or not, depending on what role we want to give to the vocals. So what I'm going to do now is unsolo the vocals, move the volume way down, because these are back vocals. There's probably going to be a lead singer on top of these guys, so we really want this to be just another embellishment on the arrangement. I think that we don't necessarily need that low cut. I want the vocals to be warm and to not actually have too much air. So what I'm going to do is just try to remove some of that air on the vocals and finally put much more reverb on it. Well, that was too much. Now remember what I said about leaving headroom. Now we're down to 8.1. The way I mix usually is to bring the faders down as much as possible so it never clips. So what I'm going to do now is go back to the mixer and select all of my sounds. And by looking at the headroom left here, I'm going to move all of the faders up. And by moving the faders up, I feel like there's too much drums in my mix. Okay, and now on to mastering this track. So before mastering, I thought it would be interesting to compare what we started with and our new mix. So let's listen to a premix that I recorded before starting the tutorial. And now let's listen to the mix. obviously the glockenspiel and the vocals were very upfront in the pre-mix. It didn't make really any sense. So we moved those back into the virtual space, and we've created a mix that's much more lush, I think, smoother, but also more wet. Everything was dry in the premix. We needed to create some space. So for now, it's good. I think the mix could get more retouching once we go further with the mastering. So now what we're going to do is turn to the mixer, and here on the output, I'm going to apply this factory top 40 mastering preset. There are also some mastering presets here in the legacy content. I just want to try these because I've never tried them. So let's try top 40 and see what that does. Oh, I'm going to reset the channel strip. Okay, output. Let's go back to factory, top 40. All right, lots of plugins, not the ones that we got used to in the mixing stage. We're going to start with the enveloper, which is a transient shaper. Usually what that does is bring back some of the transients that you want for maximum impact and punch on the mix. So if we don't like what that does, we can also go to the presets here. And let's say, for example, maybe I made it too soft and I want to add attack. Okay, so now there's a huge, like, little sharp thingy here on the attack. So this is very subtle. I think we can also play with threshold for a second here. Let's leave the basic values and move on to the compressor. Now, usually with the first compressor on a mastering chain, what you want to do is really catch just those louder spikes. You don't want to compress the whole track and feel like the compressor's working too much. You really just want to, cut the little bumps in the dynamic range that shouldn't be there, basically. So with a fairly rapid attack and very quick release, we are going to move the threshold just to catch those little bumps that we're going to get. Now because this is mastering, we're going to go even easier than in a mixing stage, and 2-3 dBs of noise reduction is what we're looking for. That's pretty good. We're going to make sure that the compressor doesn't bring the signal too hot, too close to 0 dB. So we're going to move the makeup gain down so we go back to, roughly -6 dBs. Okay, so that works for me. Now, there's a channel EQ here. It's removing a bit of the bass and bringing some air back, but we've already done that in the mixing stage. So what I'm going to do is recall the default settings, and we're going to do our own mastering EQ on here. Now, by experience, I've noticed that most of the mastered songs I liked had kind of a start here with a lot of bass that you don't necessarily hear. It doesn't necessarily mean that the track is muddy, but there's, on the EQ curve, it's going to be represented more. So it goes like this and gradually fades to the high end like this. Okay, so we want to reproduce this with the EQ that we're going to apply to our track. So very rapidly I see that there's something here in the 100s, probably because of the bass that we brought up, that is, you know, breaking this slope that we're looking for. And also there's some harsh frequencies, probably because that there's a lot of instruments in that range, the piano, like the high piano and the guitar. So we're gonna try to take away some of those little spikes. I'm trying to finish off this mastering EQ, and I feel like the track is a bit washed out. Nothing really stands out. So I'm gonna try to emphasize, you know, the high mids and high frequencies with the last EQ curve here. So what I'm gonna do is play the track and just move around this thing here to see where I can get some more definition and more details in the mix. So on each sides of this bump here, I can get some more detail. So what I'm going to do is have an equally large and big bump as the blue thing here, and I'm going to apply a soft little high shelf here. But because I'm going to emphasize all of these super high frequencies, I'm going to bring back some high cut. Finally, with this low shelf here, I'm trying to make the track rounder a bit. I feel like it could be a bit too cold, and I want to make this organic. In the tutorial, I was referencing those super low frequencies that we don't necessarily hear, but that take away a lot of energy. And right now I feel like in the drums here, since especially we boosted like a big amount on the kick, we should, you know, be very careful with the very low end. Like bringing the low cut a bit higher. And I feel like we're getting back some of those details and the definition on the overall mix when we remove that. And it actually doesn't change the tone of the drum track too much. Okay, so on to our next plugin, the Exciter. We've already done that job with the EQ, but let's see if it helps us a bit more. See, so it's really just acting on the very high frequencies. I think I prefer color 2 with roughly, you know, 50%. We could try to bring down the frequency, what it does. Obviously around, you know, 1K, 2K is going to become very harsh, so I'm going to move it back up. You know, because the frequency analyzer is so important, what I'm going to do is move the exciter before the channel EQ in the mastering channel strip, and that way we can use the analyzer to see what our exciter does. So it's set to 5,000, and very rapidly you see that the exciter is boosting at 5,000, and we don't want that. So I'm going to move back down the harmonics, and I'm going to try to pinpoint a frequency here which is lacking. So maybe more around 6,000 to 7,000. Now, because we add so many plugins on the mastering chain, we really want to make sure that we're not overdoing it. I'm going to try to remove the enveloper and even the compressor just to see what we did. I'm just working on the mix because I feel like our mids are lacking a little bit of warmth. So maybe it could come from the strings, who knows. And the piano is tricky because we made it very harsh, very aggressive, so we might have to turn it down a bit. Yes, I'm starting to like that more. Now let's move on to let's bring back the compressor and the enveloper. I think it's safe now. And with the compressor, you know what, I'm probably not going to do a whole lot. Just really try to control a little bit of the harder dynamics, but in that way maybe I should just move the attack down here. Okay, on to our last two plugins. The multipressor is a multi-band compressor. So what it does is compress different bands, and this is a great tool to visualize also the different frequency bands that we're working with. Bass is from 20 hertz to 200 usually, and that's what we pretty much worked with today. The drums were around, the kick was around 50, and then the bass started around 60 all the way up to 200, and then the low mids and some of the boxiness is between 200 and 500. The vocals here from roughly, again, 500 to 5K. And finally, the air and the very high frequencies, the sparkle, is starting from 5K all the way up to 20K. So let's try to apply let's try the rock compressor. And what you want to achieve here, we're not going to touch any of these things, the attack and the release and the ratios. We're going to leave it as is. We're just going to play with this bar here so that all of our levels come to 0, right? So we're going to play the track. Now, because our signal is quite low, we are going now to work on these 4 boxes here, the compression threshold, so that the multipressor reduces by roughly 2 to 3 dBs on each of these bands. That's what you want to see. You want the blue band to be affected by the compression. So really, really subtle, not too much. And let's do the same thing. Now notice that I'm cheating a bit with the highs and even the mid highs because I feel like our track needed that a bit more. I guess we tamed it a bit too much during the mixing process. So. I really like the track without it, so it's okay to not use one of the plugins. If you like the sound better without, that's our choice. And finally, the limiter. Again, as in any compression, a limiter is a compressor. You don't want to reduce by more than 3 dB. So what we're going to do here is just move the gain all the way up to where the limiter is reducing the gain by 3 dBs. Now it's distorting a bit, and it's good to know that there are two limiters in Logic. There's the traditional limiter, but there's also an adaptive limiter, which I think is more transparent and brings in less distortion, because obviously at minus 3 dBs, the previous limiter was destroying our track, and obviously we don't want that. So rule of thumb for the adaptive limiter is to put the central gain here to 6 dBs. And what you want to do is pay attention here that it doesn't go over. And again, what you're going to do is just move up the input scale to where you get a 0 dB roughly final output. Now I feel like the mids are a bit too present, so I could go back to the multipressor now, see if it helps the overall finish of the song. And I feel like the guitar now is a bit too present. Ladies and gentlemen, this is it. Mixing and mastering in Logic Pro X using the channel strips. Now we're going to move on to EDM and trap and go a bit faster, because now you've learned the basics of mixing with the channel strips, and also the basics of mixing altogether, like frequency separation, balance, compression, EQ, all of that good stuff, and the effects also. So let's move on to EDM.